Hello and welcome to the oddschecker betting show. The jumps season has arrived and this is our Cheltenham Showcase preview sponsored by 888 Sport. Coming up on today's show, we'll be covering off a couple of races on Friday before going through the card at Cheltenham on Saturday with tips from Andy Holding and Rory Delargy. You'll also hear from a man who knows a thing or two about Cheltenham himself, legendary jockey and now 888 Sport ambassador Barry Geraghty. He'll be answering your questions. Thanks to those of you who sent those in. We'll be getting to that halfway through the show. I'm your host, George Elek, and I'm joined, as I mentioned, by our two expert guests, oddschecker's very own Andy Holding and the excellent, as ever, Rory Delargy. Great to have you both with us today. And as I said at the top of the show, the jump season is back. We go to Cheltenham West. So much focus around the jump season seems to centre, of course, because of the festival, which is a distant spot on the horizon, Rory. But how excited are you to have Cheltenham back as a racecourse? How excited are you to have the jumps back?
Yeah, I'm not going to say 22 weeks to go, which is roughly the situation we're in. But yeah, it's good to see proper jumping back. Traditionally for me, I'm sure Andy would be much the same. When I was a lad, you would have no jumping at all from the whitbread until the autumn on TV. And the sign of jumping coming back was that televised meeting at Chepstow on the BBC, which wasn't on terrestrial TV this year. And then the first meeting on ITV or Channel 4, as it was back in the day, was the Charisma Gold Cup at Kempton, and then you're into Cheltenham thereafter. Although the October meeting at Cheltenham was never a big thing in the early 80s, mid 80s. It's the showcase has really grown in the last 10 or 12 years as a big meeting, and it really is a sign that jumping is back properly. We'll not talk about the festival. I think people get fed up with that, but this is the meeting in its own right that stands up to some scrutiny. Things, will step up a gear again from the middle of next month, but it's nice to see racing back at Cheltenham, and I gather that the ground is good to magnificent, according to the clerk of the course.
Yeah, I mean, that is what we're going to speak about. I mean, looking ahead, Andy, at what we've got in store for us both over Friday and Saturday. Now, we're recording this at 10 to midday on Thursday afternoon. So we've got the both Friday and Saturday cards confirmed. The Friday markets are kind of forming as we speak. Hopefully, by the time we get to Saturday, those will be there too. But what can we expect in terms of conditions ahead of the weekend in terms of rain? I know there's been a lot of rain around in the south of England where we are. Can we anticipate it's going to be fairly soft come Friday and Saturday?
It could be fairly welcome, whatever amounts they get at Cheltenham. I think they probably needed it. Saves Simon Clace probably having to go to the, his water resources just now, which is good. I don't think he wants to be making artificial ground at this time of the season. If it's just on the easy side of good, I think that'll please all. It hasn't pleased everyone because it's still not soft enough to get us really big fields in a lot of the races, and we've actually got a couple of withdrawals to talk about on the Friday, which is a little bit of a shame. Off Your Rocco doesn't go. We'll get onto that in a second. But I think this is just the hors d'oeuvre, isn't it? It gets the juices flowed for the rest of the season. We see Cheltenham again. The crowd will be flocking in their droves. Of course, we haven't been able to go to Cheltenham since 2020. So there'll be lots of people chomping at the bit, dusting down their tweed jackets, etc. And I'm sure they'll have a big crowd Friday, Saturday, come whatever the racing.
Yeah, I'm incredibly excited to watch it. As you say, too much is said about the festival itself. It certainly is a place to watch racing. Nothing gets much better than sitting on the sofa on a lazy weekend afternoon and watching the racing at Cheltenham, and I'm looking forward to doing that over the next couple of days. As I mentioned, we are going to touch on the racing on Friday, so tomorrow. So if you are listening to this on Friday afternoon and that's all out of date, you might want to scrub forward a bit. Make sure you don't miss out the interview with 888 Sport ambassador Barry Geraghty, which will come in between our previews of Friday and Saturday racing. But we're just going to touch on the first few races on the card on Friday because I think we're going to leave the handicaps because these are it's the Cheltenham Showcase. We're going to see some exciting novices. Effectively, we've got a novice hurdle to start, a novice hurdle in the third race, a novice chase in the second with some familiar names in there as well. So before we do get into previewing those three races on Friday, the first three on the card, just going to point the listeners and viewers in the direction of the oddschecker app. It is where you can get the best prices, bookie offers, free bets, and plenty else as well, including, of course, Andy's tips straight to the app every morning of racing. But we'll get into the opener on Friday at Cheltenham now, the 155, the Ballymore Novices Hurdle. And this looked like it was going to be a decent betting heat. Off Urocco, though, has since been withdrawn, which means that Camprond is the 2-7 favourite ahead of Mars Harper at 7-2. All clenched up 9-1. Bannockstown Boy 50-1. And Andy, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be tipping up a 2-7 shot here. A shame not to get more of a competitive field in the opener.
Yeah, it is. Off Urocco, who won at Limerick last time, a horse I put up in my column, has been a real progressive type. He clocked a good number the time before the Listowel Festival, beating a horse called Farout, who previously won well at Galway. So he would have been serious competition for Comprond, of course, winner of a graded race himself last time out in the shape of the Persian War. And that was a career high for Philip Hobbs's charge, wasn't it? Who, prior to that, been a little shade disappointing in some respects in handicaps, albeit it wasn't his fault he was sent off favourite. And they stepped him up in trip and he seemed to really suit it. I think with the exercise for this race with Royal Guards Comprond to see whether he can translate that Chepstow form to Cheltenham, because I'd imagine that Philip Hobbs even now has got the festival in mind, perhaps in the view to put him in a way through the depths of winter when the ground's heavy, because he looks a good to soft ground horse at best. What race he'll end up running in the festival, I don't really know. But look, he's got a good cruising speed. He's got plenty of experience, and I think this is a formality for him because Mars Harper wouldn't be good enough from what I've seen over in Ireland.
Formality, probably one for the favourite backers in their rackers. Hopefully they don't go down on the first leg with a big shock in the first. We won't spend too much longer talking about that opener, but we'll move on to the squareintheair.com Novices Chase, the 2:30, and Third Time Lucky is the 2-1 favourite ahead of Fidelio Vallis at 9-4. Any News 5-1. Any News 5-2. Buddy Rich 5-1. Sativo 33-1. Rory, just 5 run here, but at least we've got a much more competitive, albeit trappy affair. Where do you think the value lies at the moment in this one?
Third Time Lucky is very interesting in terms of, you want to see how he gets on. He's had wind surgery since we last saw him. He was second favourite around November time for the Supreme based on his early showings over hurdles. He came up short in the end, but he's quite an exciting horse. He's got a very high cruising speed. I'm not sure he finds as much off the bridle, or he certainly didn't last season, as looked like on occasions. He frequently looked to be travelling best, but he was turned over having traded short and running a couple of times. But maybe the wind surgery will fix that. And he does have a point background as well. So he's an interesting horse starting off over fences for the Skeletons. But I think the fitness of Any News might make a difference here. He ran very well at Warwick the other day. The fact that he was beaten in a handicap chase at Warwick would put a few people off, given you expected to see graded horses in this race. But he was just in need of that run, I thought. It was well backed, but he found a race-fit rival in Beyond the Clouds just too strong for him there, although he probably would have won if he'd winged the second last. The only worry I would have with Any News, I was there that day at Warwick. I didn't think he moved brilliantly to post, and he was just a little bit doddery in the very early stages of the race. Once he warmed up, he was very good. He jumped very well down the back straight, which is always a test for horses. A really good track to bring a novice, Warwick, because of that line of fences in the back straight, which Any News coped very well with. And he jumped pretty much all the fences in the last circuit really well, apart from the second last, which comes very quickly after the bend, and that can put a horse off his stride. I thought he did really well then. I expected him, having made that mistake, to fade out of it and finish third. But he's rallied again and was going on very well close home, just beating a neck by Beyond the Clouds. The going was just on the soft side of good there, but it got softer through the day. It rained reasonably heavily in the afternoon. So he won't mind the softer ground, whereas I think Beyond the Clouds, who won that race, really wanted it pretty quick and got away with it that day. But Any News, I spoke to Neil Mulholland afterwards. He was really pleased with him, thought he would come on from the run and thought he was a really good prospect for the season. So if he copes with the early fences here, and that would be my only worry with him, I think he's a kind of horse who might just need to warm up a little bit. But once he has warmed up, I think he'll go very well. He looked a really promising novice hurdler last season. He's got a proper chasing pedigree as well. And I think he'll run a big race here. It's possible that Third Time Lucky would be a better long-term prospect as a chaser. But Any News, with that run behind him just 3 weeks ago, his superior fitness will kick in there.
Any news? The one for Rory there, 5-2, best price at the moment. Andy, how do you see it?
Yeah, certainly respect any news. He's always looked as though he was going to make a chaser, but I think the horse coming in here for me, certainly with the best form and with fitness on his side, similar to Rory's, and he knows is Fidelio Vallis. I imagine Paul Nicholls came away from that race the other day at Chepstow scratching his head how this horse didn't manage to win, because very rarely do you see a horse jump as well as he did and not win. I think you've got to give fair credit, therefore, to T. Clipper, who ultimately outran him late on. And I think the kind of conclusion I came to, having watched that race a couple of times, was that maybe Fidelio Vallis wants to drop him back to 2 miles, and that's exactly what Connections have decided to do. This looks tailor-made for him, doesn't it? You know, fitting well, jumps well, good ground fine, plenty of experience, off in front, I'd imagine, and put his stamp on the race from an early stage. Get the others at it, if you like. Third time lucky is one of several horses that Dan Skelton's going to be hoping will make up into a nice 2 mile novice throughout the season. Kadzan being another one. Unfortunately, we're robbed of seeing him today at Carlisle as we speak. He's already got Favre as well, which we'll talk about. And maybe Langadan as well, who, of course, ran really well at the festival himself. Whether he's got the scope to be a chaser, I don't know. But those are the sort of 3 or 4 that Dan's probably hoping will make the grade this season in this division. But on this occasion, I'd probably go with Fidelio Vallis, whose jumping is already assured.
Fidelio Vallis.
The only thing I'd throw in, sorry, the only thing I'd throw in about Fidelio Vallis is well worth bearing in mind that he's only run once at Cheltenham, which was against Third Time Lucky in the Supreme Trial last year, where they were both beaten by For Pleasure. And I didn't think Fidelio Vallis got up the hill that day. I think Andy's absolutely right about his jumping being very slick, and he's liable to travel very well through this race. But I'm just a bit worried about him coming up the hill, given what he showed here last November. And of course, he's 8 pounds worse off, having been beaten by 17 lengths by Third Time Lucky there. So that's a bit of an ask of him. But judging chasers on what they did over hurdles is often a very dangerous game.
Yeah, it's probably more to do with the ground that day. I think it was really soft ground, wasn't it? And
yeah,
he's never struck me as being a soft ground horse. So horses can stop quickly on soft ground, but good ground as we speak at the moment. If they don't get any more rain, he'll probably just be okay.
9-4, Fidelio Vallis there for Andy, 5-2 for Rory. Any news? On to the third race on the card. It is the 888 Sport What's Your Thinking Novices Hurdle, where Dragon Bones is the 4-1 joint favourite with Calagogo. Grace of Uenki is 5-1. Bardenstown Lad 11-2. On a Gathering Storm 13-2. Rory Delargy and Drumley Water both 7-1. Alma's Alzamar Guard 12-1. Andy, 8 runners here for the 888 Sports Novices Hurdle, the third race on the card. Anything standing out for you at the moment?
Yeah, Bardenstown Lad's the one I quite like here, George. He's a progressive type. He comes from a stable that does quite well with this kind of horse. I think Streets of Doyen was a horse last year that had a similar profile and went on to run well in the Albert Bartlett, finishing third. And even though it's a fairly early stage in the season, I'd expect this horse to sort of go down that similar route, because stamina seems to be his key component, major component. He was very strong at the finish at Navan last time, having got outpaced behind Tullybeg, doing all his best work on the running. And I think he's really tailor-made for this track. 2 miles 7 and a bit on a stiff course should bring the best out of him. And we know he travels really well because he came over here early on the season, won quite easily at Cartmel. So he's just the kind of horse I want to be backing in a race like this, particularly as we get the dead 8 runners, nice each way bet around about the 5-1 mark. And as it stands, of the ones I've seen so far, the likes of Calagogo, Drumley Watar, and even the Nicholls horse, Grace of Uenki, wouldn't have any earth-shattering figures next to their name to suggest that they're above average for this time of year. So I'd expect perhaps John McConnell to be plundering another prize here with Bardenstown Lad.
Bardenstown Lad, blue on oddschecker, 11-2 as we speak at the moment. Opened up, I think, 6-1 before that was swiftly taken. 13-2 it was before that was taken down. 11-2 as it is for the moment. The one for Andy. Rory, how do you see it?
I'm with Andy here. I like. John McConnell's record here is very good. He's done pretty well at this meeting, but his record when bringing horses over to the UK is pretty remarkable. 23 winners from 73 runners in the last 5 seasons. That's a 32% strike rate. That's he's doing at least as well as Willie Mullins and Gordon Elliott on that. And yes, he targets smaller prizes as a rule. but he does very well with it. And I think Bardenstein Lad is just a horse with a lot of potential as well. The race he won at Cartmel was a nothing race, but it was just giving the horse a bit of experience. He won when he was held up at Wexford in his hurdles debut, and then he made the running at Cartmel. I very much liked his run at Navan last time. He was only third there, but that's decent form. The winner of that race won a handicap next time out off a mark of 130. I think Tullybeg.
Yeah.
And the horse that Tullybeg beat then won the Durham National next time out off a mark of 142. I know you're mixing codes there to a degree, but that's strong form. And if you look back at that race as well, that was a 2 mile 5, extended 2 mile 5 novice hurdle. Bardenstein Lad got outpaced in the straight and then was staying on really strongly from the last. If that was a 3 mile race and they'd gone for home when they did, I think he'd have picked them up. And he will definitely appreciate the return to 3 miles here. I think he's definitely a better horse in my book than Calagogo. Calagogo won well at Killarney last time out, but that form is suspect. I mean, he might be as good as it looks, but the second and fourth have come out and been well beaten since. He dictated the pace that day. It was a very slow pace, and he's kicked on. He was very well ridden by Jordan Gainford to win that. I'm not sure the form is worth an awful lot, to be honest. Obviously, the horse could be better than the bare form, but I think Bardenstein Lad's form has got more strength to it, more depth. And I'd argue they should be favourite for this. So even though he's been clipped into 11-2 already, I think that's a value price. As Andy says, particularly if all the 8 go to post, because you're looking at a very nice shape for each way betting as well. But I'd be happy to back him win only at that price. Sierra Delac has been quite well talked up for this, but he's got an awful lot to prove. He was a very good chaser a couple of seasons ago, around 2.5 miles, but he's failed to complete his last 3 runs. And all the positives about him over fences prior to that seem to go because his jumping fell apart on his last 2 starts, and he didn't look at all keen at Cheltenham when we last saw him at the open meeting, or no longer the open meeting, is it the November meeting last year. So I think he's got plenty to prove, particularly up and trip, because he wouldn't be an obvious stayer at 3 miles. Grace of Enki, he could be better than he looked at Worcester last time out. Again, that was a very slow pace. And there must have been a length and a half between the entire field off the home bend. And I don't think that suited him. He stayed on very well to be second, but he was outspeeded by the winner. So stepping up to 3 miles, he could do a fair bit better, but I think he probably has to. And being trained by Paul Nicholls, he's well enough found in the market. So for me, while most of these horses can do better, I think Bardenstein Lad has done enough to suggest he should be favourite for this race. I'll be more than happy to take 11-2 about it.
11-2, the double selection for both Rory and Andy. Bardenstown Lad in the third race. There are a couple of others on the card. I'm just going to open it up to you guys before we move on to Saturday. We've got the 888 Sport Novices Limited Handicap Chase is the 340. And then, Andy, I know that you're with the maiden hurdle might be one for you, given your time figures. No prices for that one. Anything on the card, Andy, do you want to flag up before we move on to Saturday?
Yeah, I think Annual Invictus is an interesting runner in that novices chase, the limited handicap. I think we're going to see more of those races, aren't we now, those novices handicaps. I thought he ran really well at Uttoxeter, ran a track that wouldn't have suited him. He strikes me as being a horse that wants probably further than 2 miles anyway, but more of a stiffer test. And when he got a stiff test in the Betfair Hurdle, wasn't it, at Newbury behind Soaring Glory, he beat Buzz actually that day, the Stays Hurdle winner elect. Next season. So I thought that was a really good run. You wouldn't put your absolute house on him turning the form around with Favois, but to my eye, I thought he'd probably come on for the run more than those 2 at Uttoxeter. He'll do for me there. And one of the horses I'm going to be following for the rest of the season. Well, hopefully I will anyway. If he comes through his first race in flying colours, he's Go Dante in the in the 525. Yeah, he was a horse that I flagged up. I think last year when we did an entry preview, he was due to run in the Champion Bumper, which was a bit of a surprise because after he won at Wincanton, Connection said that's it for the year. But he got an entry and he was still declared to run, and they pulled him out at the last moment. Probably discretion being the better part of Valader. But I was massively taken with his win when he won down the West Country first time. His time figure was very good. I love the way he travelled and quickened. And I think Ollie Murphy, who went close to winning the Supreme Novices Hurdle several years ago, might have that kind of a horse on his hands this year. And it's interesting that he's starting him off at Cheltenham over the course and distance of the Supreme Novices Hurdle to get his eye in already. So expect his odds to tumble for the Supreme after winning, hopefully, tomorrow.
What kind of price do you reckon he'll be tomorrow?
I'll be surprised if he's bigger than 6-4. I must admit, I've looked at the race. There's a few interesting runners in there, a few Irish horses. Top Bandit, he's only okay. You've got a couple of sort of pointers and a couple of horses out of bumpers, but I'll be staggered if Go Dante isn't quick enough or better than that field. Put it this way, if he's going to be a Supreme Novices horse, he's got to be winning this and winning it easy.
He's got to win.
It'd only be a lack of fitness, really, that would stop him. So, yeah, 5-4, 6-4. I'd imagine they'd be chalked up at early.
Go Dante there in the last one for Ollie Murphy and for Andy Holding as well, in terms of a horse he's looking to keep track of over the course of the season. And then Annual Invictus there in the 888 Sport Novices Limited Handicap, the 340. Annual Invictus currently 5-2. Rory, any other business there for you on Friday?
Without putting up a selection for it, I think the Amateur Riders Chase is very interesting. It's a big field. The ground, I mean, there's been plenty of rain around, so the ground will be on the soft side to start the meeting off. Not hog deep, but soft enough to put a bit more emphasis on stamina than if it was the typically quick ground we get at this meeting. So if you're looking to have a bet on that race, despite the fact that it's over an extended 3-mile one, I think it'll be run at a really strong pace. And you want to be looking at jockeys who are happy to sit off the pace and pick things up late in the day. You need to have a lot of nerve to do that. The obvious one is the top one. Derek O'Connor's been booked for. Yeah. Marquis of Carabas. He's been off the track for quite a long time, but I gather has been laid out for the race. He'd be the most obvious one, but of course the market has picked him up and he's been backed into about 5-1 favoritism. Derek O'Connor will be happy just to sit out of his ground and gradually pick these up. Whereas I think a few of these riders who are fairly inexperienced amateurs will be, when they find themselves traveling well at the top of the hill, they won't be able to stop themselves going for home. And as you've seen so many times at Cheltenham over the years, it's a long way home from the top of the hill. So the complexion of this race could change a lot from the last fence. And I can see something coming from 20 lengths off them, heading down the hill, and not necessarily going with them when they quicken and then picking them up after the last fence. So as I said, the favourite with Derek O'Connor on board is an interesting one. But just work out which jockeys you think, or indeed which horses are suited by extreme hold-up rides, and keep them on your side. And one or two of those will be big prices as well, because a lot of the horses on the front end won't give their running. They'll end up stopping quickly from the last fence. So horses who've got less chance on paper of getting involved will pick up the pieces later on. So that's worth bearing in mind, even for your play spots and stuff as well. In that last race, I just want to mention one. Not that I necessarily think he's a great bet in the day. Liable to hit the frame though. Cirque Royale, ex-Godolphin horse. I don't think many people will know much about a guy who appears as Gerald Stephen Quinn on the race card. There's a guy, Ger Quinn, who was conditional jockey to John Joe O'Neill about 10 years ago. He didn't really make the grade as a conditional, but he headed back home to Ireland. He is now a salaried trainer for the owner of Cirque Royale, Mr. McBurney. He trains at a very, very nice setup in County Antrim, not a million miles away from where I was born. And I think you'll be hearing a lot more of Ger Quinn in the next year or two. I think the setup they have there, the McBurney setup, is very, very professional. They've got access to some very nice horses. And as we've seen over the years, you get some very, very good horses coming out of Northern Ireland. Traditionally, because you've only got the 2 racetracks there and not that many top trainers, the horses tend to go for export. But I think you're going to see more and more of those horses coming through. And Ger Quinn is definitely a trainer to keep an eye on when bringing them over. He's only had his license since August, I think. Okay. So it's a very recent license. He had his first 2 runners at Perth. This one, Cirque Royale, was the first of them, and he traded long odds on and running and just got touched off. And the second of them won the bumper very impressively that day. So this is an operation that knows what they're doing.
Interesting, a horse there in Cirque Royale to watch, but more importantly, a trainer to watch in Ger Quinn there from Rory. We're going to get into the Saturday racing at Cheltenham in a second, but before we do so, delighted to say I was able to have a chat to somebody who knows Cheltenham better than most and get his insights ahead of what's sure to be not only a great weekend of racing, but a fantastic jump season too. 888 Sport ambassador Barry Geraghty. Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by an all-time great, a jockey with nearly 2,000 winners to his name, 888 Sport ambassador, Barry Geraghty. Barry, thank you very, very much for joining us today. How are you getting on?
I'm good, George. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And not at all. You are here courtesy of our sponsors, 888 Sport, and that's a partnership that's just been launched this week ahead of the showcase meeting at Cheltenham. What kind of things have you been up to so far in your new role as 888 ambassador?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I'm really enjoying the role and working with 888. But we were in Henry de Bromhead's last week, which was brilliant. Interviewed Henry, had a good chat with him. Looked at the superstars: Manila Indo, Manila Times, Honeysuckle, Bob Allinger, A Plutard, the wealth of talent, and just to be there and see them in the flesh, Honeysuckle on the gallops, and in around them, around the stables, everything. So no, we'd full access. We did a course walk in Cheltenham as well, which brought back some great memories, walking both tracks and seeing the chase course especially, bringing back memories. Moscow Flyer, Sprinter Sacra, Champ, Bobsworth, lots to reflect on.
Yeah, well, we're going to get some of those memories of yours from Cheltenham, plenty of them, in the coming few minutes. And I'm jealous of your time spent at Henry de Bromhead's. I mean, did you speak to him about last season? Because obviously he was lucky enough to have some incredible horses, but that week at Cheltenham is the kind of thing that dreams are made of. Not only that dreams are made of, but I think you don't even dare to dream to have a week like the week that Henry had at Cheltenham. Did you reflect on that time with him?
Oh, he did, and even still, he finds it hard to believe. The way it all went, and then to win the Grand National as well, but to have the 1-2 in the Gold Cup, the 1-2 in the Grand National, to win the Champion Chase and the Champion Hurdle. And I said to Henry on the day, that I feel that his achievements haven't been recognised for the enormity that they are, because no trainer has ever done that. What he did in one season, so many would be lucky to do in a career. It was unbelievable. So it's probably Henry. I don't think it's sunk in really with him yet, but he's not trying not to get too caught up in it.
He's set the bar pretty high for himself for the coming season. We've actually got a trailer for When Barry Met Henry, a great feature with Barry spending some time with last season's star trainer, Henry de Bromhead.
So 6 months on from the entry Grand National, we've come to Henry de Bromhead's yard in Waterford to see Manila Times, who was part of the 1-2 in the Grand National. Also Henry's 6 winners from the Cheltenham Festival, including Manila Indo and A Plutard, the first 2 in the Gold Cup.
I don't know what I do to myself. I just can't believe we can have this kind of luck or, good fortune.
You can head to the description on this podcast to watch that full When Barry Met Henry feature on 888 Sports brand new racing YouTube channel. It's definitely worth checking it out. Some great insight there. But back to you, Barry, now. And you mentioned the course walk there at Cheltenham. Can you sum up to us what Cheltenham Racecourse means to you?
Cheltenham is everything, really. Well, it's the first race on Friday in Cheltenham, it's the start of the season. It's really where it kicks off. We're all looking forward to the festival, but every winner at Cheltenham, the crowds celebrate them like none other. There's no other racecourse gets the atmosphere. The stakes are at their highest, and everyone wants to win in Cheltenham. So it's massive, and it's our flagship for the sport, and it's where we can showcase our talent, and it's where everyone wants to win.
It's interesting because I think quite often people get so wrapped up in the festival itself that you forget that Cheltenham Racecourse is a very special place to race at other times in the year. We've got this cracking weekends racing coming up. We've got more brilliant stuff in the future at Cheltenham itself. Is there still, when you're a jockey, does the course itself hold some allure beyond the festival itself in terms of being that, the home of racing, effectively, where you want to go and win on whenever possible?
Oh, definitely. And when you arrive in Cheltenham, as I did a few weeks ago, there's a hair stand on the back of your neck moment. You know, it is, Cheltenham is massive, but you go out on the track, and the track it's such a difficult track to ride. It offers great opportunities, but it also offers opportunity for mistakes or misjudgment. So it's the greatest test of all, because there's so much can go right and so much can go wrong. So there's a lot of moving parts when you're riding around Cheltenham, and it's such a difficult place. But tricky fences, uphill runs, downhill runs. You know, the finish, the downhill run into the straight, and then climb up to the finish line. It's such a test, and then throw in, you know, the whole expectation, the pressure, the crowd, the atmosphere, everything. It all multiplies everything.
You know, you mentioned that things can go right and things can go wrong, and we've asked a few people on Twitter to send in their questions for you. And the first one that I'm going to ask you is directly on that theme. It was from David, who asks, "What do you consider your best ride ever at Cheltenham?" And I think diplomatically put this, which do you look back on and think, I should have won there?
Yeah, I'd say, well, I'll start with the one that I should have won, maybe. Yanmort in the Neptune, 2016 maybe. He got trapped wide, top of the hill. I went for a big jump at the third last to get into the position I wanted to be in, and he made a bad mistake. It put me on the back foot. You know, he was second to York Hill, so the form worked out well as regards York Hill being a very good horse, but that was the one that got away from me. I wouldn't mind having another go at that one. I'd suppose rides I'm proud of stuff. Champ was obviously brilliant at last year's festival, to come from where he came from. But personally, I would say Bobsworth's Gold Cup was a little bit like Champ, outpaced over the third last. The two lead horses went for it around the turn in, and I didn't commit and just saved a bit, and then committed after the second last. And he won well in the finish, but he didn't look like a winner for a lot of the race. So being the Gold Cup, to win a race like that in that kind of style, it meant an awful lot.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it must have felt like. This is a question from Adam. Feels like Adam might be living back in the year 2000 here rather than 2021. He asks, who's got more of a chance of winning a Gold Cup out of Chantry House and Defi de Soy? Two horses that, of course, you know well. Defi having a difficult time of things at the moment, but Chantry House looking incredibly progressive and exciting.
Yeah, Defi just hasn't really hit top form in a while. He is a very, very good horse, as you've seen with his successes at the festival. But as regards for a Gold Cup, he would have a long way to go to get to that trip. I'm not saying he won't get it or might never run it, but he's won over 2.5. To get 3 mile in somewhere like Kempton would be a stepping stone to a Gold Cup, but it's still a big step from there to a Gold Cup. Or Chantry House is a point-to-point winner. He's won over 3 mile in Aintree. He won over 2.5 at the festival. He looks a very progressive type, and you know, he has the potential to be a Gold Cup horse, but it is a very, very strong division.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fingers crossed we see Defi return to the kind of form that we saw a couple of years ago. Leon asks, I'm interested to hear your answer to this. I imagine as a jockey yourself, you look pretty hard at this. Who is a current young jockey to watch? Who do you say people should keep an eye on for the future? Yeah,
I suppose of the young lads, I'm a big fan of John Joe Jr. I think he's a brilliant rider. And he is getting the opportunity, and he is seizing that opportunity. So for me, he's a man who's going to take the next step into the top level, I think.
John Joe Jr., the one to watch there, no surprises. And a final one from Ali, who says, aside from Cheltenham, what's the meeting that excites you the most in the jumps calendar, both when you were a jockey and now just as a racing fan?
I'd have to be the Grand National. The meeting itself was brilliant, but it's all about the Grand National, and just going out in that race itself it's the greatest buzz. Just to ride in the race, just to complete the course, they're all thrills. But to win it then is probably it is probably the ultimate.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I always wonder, very foreign to us as just racing fans watching on, as somebody who rode in a lot of Grand Nationals, as somebody who rode in a lot of Cheltenham festivals, what were the nerves like? I mean, how did you feel kind of approaching, even if it was your 10th or whatever Grand National? Did that buzz ever go? I mean, how different is it to the kind of day in, day out racing experience?
Well, it would be different from the day in, day out. You would always have a certain amount of nervous energy, which you will need to get up for the occasion. Your blood will be up every day of the week, but it will particularly be up for Cheltenham, obviously, and the Grand National as well. I'd suppose in youth, you would have more anxiety. You'd be a little bit more worried about the what ifs, but then with experience, after 10 years experience, to expect anything, and you're prepared for anything. So you can go out with a cooler head, if you like, to expect the unexpected is the thing, really. But yeah, experience gives you that. But there's probably more anxiety as a young fella heading out.
Before we let you go, Barry, let's talk about Saturday's racing. And you must be excited to come over and see some live racing back on this side of the water again. We should see some exciting horses running on Saturday. Cloth Cap runs in the 888 Sport 3 mile 1 furlong handicap chase, and of course Grand Annual winner Sky Pirate goes in the 2 mile handicap chase. Who are you most excited to see? Who do you think could go well on Saturday?
Cloth Cap will be very interesting. I'd suppose the two things would maybe posing a question mark over him. He's top weight, which I don't think is ideal. He's not the biggest horse in the world. It's also a first run back after a wind operation, which some horses often don't perform to their best on their first run after an operation. So it will be interesting to see how he does. It is a very competitive race, but he's towards the head of the market, I'm sure, and he'll definitely be one of the players, but it is competitive. The 2 mile chase, I think Sky Pirate, he looks to have the measure of the opposition here. He got £7 for winning at the festival last year. He was a revelation the way he progressed through the season, but he looks to have hold all the aces in this one.
Interesting stuff. It's going to be a great day's racing. Thank you very much, Barry, for taking the time to speak to us. You got a sneak preview there of some of the horses racing on Saturday. Back over to Andy and Rory for their previews. Thank you very much to 888 Sport, our sponsors for this podcast, and to Barry Geraghty for taking the time to chat to us there. Let's get into Saturday's racing because we've got plenty to get through as well. We're going to leave the opener and the closer and go through the middle 5 races on the card. And that starts with the 220, the 88 Sport What's Your Thinking handicap chase, where Storm Control is the 5-1 favourite ahead of Cloth Cap and Jersey Bean, who are both 6-1. Manila Bobo 7-1, Definite Plan 9-1, Domaine de Lille 10-1, 11-1 Bar. Plenty still in there, Andy. Good to see some bigger fields, I guess, here on the card on Saturday. What do you make? I mean, these prices are hot off the press, so probably the first you've heard of them. What do you make of them?
Well, just a race like this in general, really, it's probably right down the bottom of my food chain betting wise. I find handicap chases probably the hardest betting medium in the national game, to be fair. It's all about rhythm, getting into a good place, and particularly Cheltenham, eyeing your fences up and not making mistakes is paramount. Particularly when you've got an early season chase like this, where you've got horses coming back off layoffs, some are jumpers. Which one you want to jump on is like I say, is quite a difficult exercise to kind of get your head around. But I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for Go Another One, another one of those John McConnell horses we talked about. His horse Bardenstown Lad on the Friday, and the same owner has got this horse. He's a fairly consistent, likeable type, particularly when the ground's good, and he has got fitness on his side. He was very game in victory at Perth when we last saw him, and he's had a very eye-catching spin as well around this track already. It actually came on the new course when he was 6, wasn't it, in the Kim Muir? But if you scan your mind back to Cheltenham that day, he was one of the well backed outsiders. I think he was back from 33s and around about 10s, but he traded at even money and running coming down the hill. He was miles off the speed, but then I think from sort of the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill, he come there looming as if he was going to win 100 yards. But on the rain softened ground, he just didn't quite get home over 3 mile 2. That sort of like sucked his life out of him. But I think, sort of 3 miles good ground early on the season when he's fit, it's a different ball game at this time of the year. So he strikes me as being one that I wouldn't mind if you could on each way if I was going to have a bet or put one up. So yeah, Go Another One. He'd probably do for me if I was looking to do some play spots, etc. Go Another One.
That's the way you talk about these handicap chases, isn't it? Go Another One. Just move on to the next one. But 11-1. Yeah. The selection for you there. Again, for connections you've already spoken about on the podcast. 11-1 best price as it stands.
Yeah, I'd agree with Andy that you'd want to Go Another One on your short list for this. Plenty of them high enough in the weights I reckon. But a couple of interest in there. You've got to be interested in Storm Control, who tends to show his form around here. Rarely runs a bad race at Cheltenham. But more importantly, Kerry Lee's only had about 3 or 4 runners in the last couple of months, and they've all been winners. She's her last 4 runners have all been successful. She's not running them willy-nilly. And therefore, with a trainer in that kind of form, you've got to sit up and take notice. And a horse who's proven in the conditions, ideally, we'll want to find out the ground is on the soft side to back him. If it's the quicker it gets, the more it brings others into play. Whereas Storm Control handles it pretty deep. So there'll be a slight question mark about the ground on the day. I certainly wouldn't rule out Manila Bobo either. He's gone up a fair bit in the weights for winning at Foss last in May. But Rebecca Curtis tends to get her horses ready first time out. He promised a lot a couple of seasons ago and then just seemed to lose his way again, as quite a few from that yard did. But good to see him back in winning form when he was last seen. And although the handicapper hit him pretty hard for that, he deserves his place in a race like this. So I'd also have him in the shortlist.
Manila Bobo on the shortlist there, 7-1. Storm Control 5-1. Move on to the 255, the Masterton Holdings Hurdle, not named after Andy, sadly, where Tritonic is the even money favourite, ahead of I Like to Move It and Stepney Causeway, both 5-2, 66-1, 2 shots of tequila. So to all intents and purposes, Rory, this looks like a 3-runner affair. Are you looking to take on the even money fav?
Yeah, it's not a betting race for me. Tritonic looked a really good novice hurdler last season. I liked him a lot on the flat. I liked him as a 2-year-old. And I thought he was the type who would do really well in the fullness of time. He obviously impressed plenty of people with his first couple of wins over hurdles. Although he was entitled to win as well as he did at Kempton in a second start, and then he came up short in the Triumph. It was a very strong Triumph though. But I was a little disappointing because we expected him to improve a chunk again on what he'd done at Kempton, and he didn't really come forward. If anything, he sort of took a backward step there. So there's a slight question mark as to whether he's going to fulfill his potential over hurdles. But there's also the notion that he looked like he was set to do an awful lot better. And having only had the 3 starts, there should be more to come from him as well. And he's got a touch of class about him. But he does have, he's got to give weight away to I Like to Move It, who's race fit and was impressive at Worcester last time out. And that might make the difference here. And obviously you've got Stepney Causeway in there, who did very well last season at a slightly lower level and comes here on the back of wind surgery for Dan Skelton, so he'll be ready for the run as well. And Tritonic will need to be at least as good as he looked at Kempton to give weight away to those 2. And we've seen a few shocks in this race over the years as well, so it's not the easiest betting medium, and it's never easy to work out with juvenile hurdlers which of those were precocious and won't really go on and which will take a step forward in their second season. So I tend to fight shy of punting in races like this.
So respect for Tritonic, but no bet race for Rory by the sounds of things at the moment. Andy, can you find us any value?
Well, I always thought that Tritonic was massively overrated last season, and it wasn't a great surprise to me that he bombed out in the Triumph Hurdle. And his form subsequently in a couple of races on the flat, it didn't really kind of like show that much either. It's got a touch of the Goshen to me, that horse. I wouldn't want to be touching him at even money, even allowing for the fact that Alan King's horse in good form. I'd also probably want to get against I Like to Move It, which I've got to be careful because I'm going to be left with one horse running for me. But he jumped.
2 shots of tequila, 6-1.
Well, he jumped awfully. It was the first time out. He only had the brush hurdles to jump there, but his technique was absolutely horrible. He was very straight backed. He spent ages in the air. I mean, how he won, I do not know. I do know because it was his flat speed that got him home. But he's certainly going to have to jump a hell of a lot better. And obviously with Stepney Causeway in there, putting the pressure on at the front, he's going to have to be much slicker. So I'd be with Stepney Causeway here. The race that All Mankind ran in last year, wasn't he? Got beat by Botax Har. So I think Dan would be looking to try and resurrect that sort of negative. And Stepney Causeway hadn't had the hard kind of knocking season that All Mankind had last year. I think he was very well campaigned by connections. That they kind of like avoided the bigger meetings, thinking, well, we'll give him a chance and he might make into a nice 4-year-old. He's had wind surgery, so they've obviously cleared up a little bit of remedial work there. And I think Dan Skelton, albeit he's not in the greatest of shape at the moment, I think, to be fair, he's only been running, he's seen his B team. I think some of his A team is beginning to step into the breach here. So I think we'll see a better collective of performances from Dan's horses over the weekend. And so, yeah, he'd do for me Stepney Causeway, just on process elimination, really. Don't like Tritonic at the price. I think the second favourite, Twist and Davis, also need to jump better. So Stepney Causeway.
Stepney Causeway 5-2, best price at the moment. The one for Andy, taking on Tritonic, and I like to move it. On then to the 888 Sport Handicap Chase, the fourth race on the card, the 3:30, and Sky Pirate is the 11-4 favourite ahead of Before Midnight at 4-1. Then we've got Leap Away at 6-1 alongside Belargus, Bethiva at 9-1, Ashdor 9-1, Ashdor 10-1 actually, Hatcher 12-1, Vawada Rev 12-1, 22-1 Solar Impulse. Andy, I'll stick with you here. Sky Pirate opened up at 7-2, then 130, then 3-1, now 11-4 in the last 10 minutes. So they're coming for Sky Pirate. Do you agree?
Yeah, I can see why he's favourite. I mean, he won the Grand Annual, for goodness sake, and we know he loves Cheltenham. By and large, he goes well fresh. Not sure whether he wins first time out going fresh. I'll have to sort of check my notes there, but this looks a fair starting point, doesn't it? If he is going to be a sort of on the fringes of Champion Chase stand, and he's already weighted 159, then he ought to be going close to win a race like this. He's a bit similar to like Rouge Viv, who I think won early on in the season for Harry Whittington last year. That kind of animal. He's probably not going to be grade 1, but he's probably going to be sort of grade 3 listed company, I'd suggest. So yeah, he's a player, but I'm a massive fan of Sam Thomas. He had a terrific season. Sam really came of age, had a great season numerically and class-wise as well. And he's got Before Midnight here, who I think is very well handicapped to mark 136. He beat a good field at Chepstow in a very fast time when we last saw him in April. He likes good ground. He goes really well fresh. He's hardly run a bad race in 5 or 6 starts over fences. And I just love his jumping as well. You watch him in isolation, he really does get his front and his back end up. And Sam's made a good start to the season. He's already had 1 win and 2 place from 3 runners recently. So you can bet your bottom dollar that this thing will be absolutely A1 for this race. And he likes to race up with the speed as well, which is never a bad thing at Cheltenham. So, yeah, Before Midnight will do for me in this one.
Before Midnight 4-1, best price as it stands in this 888 Sport Handicap Chase. Rory?
Again, in agreement with Andy there. I think Before Midnight is a really interesting prospect for the year. He's not had much racing for his age. I was impressed with him at Chepstow. He did make one bad mistake that day, and I thought he did remarkably well to maintain his momentum. He only won by 3/4 of a length, but had he I think it was the 4th last he hit hard.
4 out, yeah.
If he jumped that as well as he jumped the others, I think he'd have won 10 lengths. And as Andy says, he looks well handicapped, just £7 higher for that. Whereas, listen, I know Sky Pirate won the Grand Annual, but it's not the hottest handicap in the world, the Grand Annual. We shouldn't make the mistake of thinking if a race is run at the Cheltenham Festival, it must be the best race of its type in the world. And that's, obviously it's largely true of the championship races, but it's not always true of the handicaps. And he's up £7 as well. I think that Before Midnight is the one with more scope to improve beyond that. Sky Pirate's obviously got plenty of class, but he is tricky. I know he mostly got his act together last season, but he threw away the race on his return. As Andy says, he doesn't actually have a great win record fresh. He does tend to run well fresh. Doesn't take much getting fit, but he's managed to throw away a couple of winning opportunities. As I said, he turned the corner last season to a large extent, but he's up to 159 now. And I don't really see him as a Champion Chase candidate. I think there's a big difference between a race like the Grand Annual and the Champion Chase itself. Every now and again, you get a young horse to come along and win the Grand Annual and step up and be good enough for the Champion Chase. We've seen that a few times in the past, but he doesn't strike me as being quite in that mold. Although I'd fancy him to beat Hatcher at the weights, for example, and 1 or 2 of these have got high enough in the weights for winning slightly lesser contests. But it's what makes Before Midnight look well handicapped, because I think the handicapper has not gone overboard about that impressive win at Chepstow. And you've got a couple of horses in there, Solar Impulse is a light of yesterday. A shooter might have been interesting at a big price. I think he was a big price earlier in the week, but he was put up by a good judge and he's been punted into quite a short price now. if he was a 33-1 shot, you could throw an arrow at him. But I think you said he was 10-1. George,
10 to 1.
The prices.
Yeah,
that doesn't make a huge amount of appeal given he's out of the weights. He does have ability, but he was 39 lengths behind before midnight last time out. And although you can make excuses for him on that day, that wasn't absolutely his true form. There's no hint that he's actually as good as before midnight on his other form. He's just the kind of horse who might have been completely left alone in the market, would have been worth backing each way to pick up the pieces. Whereas before midnight strikes me as the kind of horse who can hit a high level over fences. And Sam Thomas, he's had very few runners. I think he's had 3 runners in the last 7 or 8 weeks. So he's really, last 3 months actually. He's really setting himself up as a trainer of proper winter horses, rather than like a lot of trainers do, try to pick up what they can through the summer and the early autumn before the big guns come out. So Sam, he's keeping his powder dry, and he's basically saying, right, I've learned what I can as a trainer. His early seasons, his strike rate was pretty poor, but he really picked up last season particularly. His strike rate went way up. The kind of horses he's getting through his yard are better, and he's getting better horses sent to him as well as a result. So I think he's going to turn into a half decent trainer, Sam. He didn't hit the ground running, but he's learned, and he's changed the way he does things, I think, and he's now getting proper winter horses, if you like, and before midnight looks in that mold. And I think not running him through the summer has probably helped his handicap mark, and this is where it pays for him.
Before midnight there for Sam Thomas, getting a doubly good write up there from Rory and from Andy. The one for them 4-1 best price at the moment, second favourite behind Sky Pirate. The penultimate race we'll be covering now is the Potemps Network Handicap Hurdle. The Potemps qualifier, Tully Begg is 4-1 favourite as it stands, ahead of Butler's Brief, who's 7-1, joint second favourite with Hall away, both 7-1. Panic Attack 10-1, Geordie Champ and Born Patriot and Push the Tempo and Shannon Bridge all 10-1. Havana Hermano 12-1 with Matt Gillany. And To Be Fair, Rory will stay with you here for this handicap hurdle. Tully Begg, the 4-1 favourite, but a pretty open affair.
Yeah, you don't necessarily want to go mad punting on Potemps qualifiers for obvious reasons, but it's always worth bearing in mind what trainers' plans are in terms of getting horses qualified for this and the handicap marks that they bring into the races with them as well. I'm inclined to give another chance to Geordie Deschamps, who was a little bit disappointing when backed into favouritism for a veterans handicap chase at Chepstow on his return, but I didn't think, with all respect to Adam Wedge, I don't think he came in for a good ride that day. On ground that probably was quick enough for him. He had won on good to firm ground before that. But I think he needed more use made of him the way that race was run. It was very difficult to come from off the pace. He travelled well enough, but then he got into the bottom of a couple of fences and lost his position. He ended up coming home 5th behind Some Chaos, who was much more prominently ridden. Some Chaos was always on the pace that day. And I don't think we saw the best of Geordie Deschamps, who's very, very lightly raced for a horse of his age. He's got a mark of 130, so if they're thinking about getting him into the Potemps, he needs to be going up in the weights. So winning this race or running very well wouldn't go astray in terms of that. I just think he's got more ability than his current mark suggests. He hasn't always been the easiest to get right, but this is the right time of year to be backing Rebecca Curtis's horses. Hopefully her stable will hold its form through the year, but it hasn't always been the case. The run at least will have done him good as well at Chepstow, so he'd be ready for this. And I think he should run a half decent race. It's not a race I'd be falling over myself to have a bet in, and I'm not sure. I didn't pick up the price that he was when you read it out there, George.
11-1.
Yeah, it's 11-1. 11-1 is fair. It doesn't have me logging off and getting onto the betting accounts, but I think he's better than the result. I put him in my notebook after that race as one to give another chance to. I didn't think he'd be running in a Potemps qualifier. I thought he might stay over fences. Veterans chases make a lot of sense for him because he's a very lightly raced 10-year-old. He's among the younger group of horses in those races, so that's a good spot for him. But I think he'd be over fences again next time. But they want to keep their options open and get him qualified for a race at Cheltenham and winning this would put him, in the weights and qualified for the Pretemps final if they wanted to go that route. So he looks like he's going to be off at least.
Geordie Deschamps there, yeah, 11-1, the one for Rory. Andy, how do you see this?
Like I do with most Pertemps qualifiers all the way through the season, there's only really one that counts, and is worth looking at in depth nowadays, and that's the one that has run at Leopardstown over Christmas. You can forget the rest; they're just side shows to the main event, really. That one has been traditionally the best one throughout the last 4 or 5 years. So I don't expect the winner to be coming out of this race, but I do expect the winner to go to Ireland. As they've shown in the Pertemps final itself, it doesn't matter how much weight you give them, what mark they get, they just win anyway. I think the Irish scene is much more competitive. And they've got two lively ones, Tullybeg and Born Patrol. Now, we've already talked about that Bardenstown lad. We're hoping that he franks the form on the Friday as we preview this race for Saturday. But Tullybeg won that race at Navan last time out, staying on very strongly, and then he went on to win at Gowan. And again, in a very fast time. There was 4 hurdle races on that card that day. That was the fastest overall, but it was also the fastest last circuit. And when you consider there was 3 races over 2 miles, and his race over 3 miles was the fastest by about 3 or 4 lengths. For 3 or 4 seconds, not 3 or 4 lengths. It was an incredible run. So I think Tullybeg is very much going through the grades quite at a rapid rate of knots. And Born Patriot, albeit has got a bit to find with his old rival from that Navan run. He strikes me as being a horse that might be well suited by a big field handicap. And of course, Peter Farr knows what he's doing when he brings one over to Cheltenham. Of course, Belfast Banter reminded of us last season. So just keep this one really simple. Just back the Irish 2 horses. It's just the best formula to having 3 mile handicaps when they come over. So Tullybeg and Born Patriot, I'd probably Dutch the pair.
Simple as that. Tullybeg, the 4-1 favourite, and Born Patriot, 12-1 best price as it stands. Andy, stick with you for the last. No prices out, so I'll just leave it over to you guys to say if there's anything you want to flag up. It is the 440, the Mick Turner, a lifetime in racing novice chase, 5 run. We've got Does He Know for Kim Bailey, Rod Dubai. The Name of Aids Me, that's an apt one for giving my pronunciation of the one before. Oscar Elite and Under Supervision, the 5 that run. Andy, any that you fancy?
I think it's quite a nice little race, this. We might see a few of these back at the festival in March, so it's a contest that you need to look at quite closely to how they jump. And I think out of all of them, I think Oscar Elite is probably the one that jumps out as being a National Hunt Chase type, RSA type, if you're going to kind of like look at races further down the line. Obviously, third in the Albert Bartlett suggested he's going to be a 3 mile stayer over fences. This is a good starting point. It's a meeting or a track where the Tizards, I'm not sure where we should look at that Colin Tizard now and look at Joe Tizard, do really well in getting their sort of like practice with their novices under their belt. And he's always looked to chase, hasn't he? If you look at him, he covers a lot of ground and has got a good way of going. So he's probably the one I'd have most of my attentions drawn to. But you've got Does He Know, obviously won well at Chepstow already with a run under his belt. We know he can operate at a good level. And Under Supervision as well, looked a nice horse last season, didn't he? When we saw him, the fleeting glimpses we got of him. So being a former pointer, I'm sure he'll have a good career of fences. But as it stands, I think Oscar Elite would probably be the one I'd choose out of this 5.
Oscar Elite there, Colin Tizard's Oscar Elite for Andy. Any you're interested in here, Rory?
Well, I was asked for a horse to follow by Paul Ferguson for his jumpers to follow book, and I actually put Oscar Elite up as my horse for the season on the basis that he was running. He was pretty raw last season. But the fact that Colin Tizard dropped him to 2 miles and ran him in that listed hurdle at Exeter in February, and he was well beaten in the end in what was a strong enough race. But it's a little bit of a giveaway with Colin. Whatever he considers to be the best horse in the yard gets an outing in that listed race, and he's won it with Native River won it going back, and his best horse, best novice every year essentially gets a spin in that, whether the trip is right for it or not, and that suggested that Oscar Elite is held in very high regard. He hadn't. When he won at Chepstow early in the season, he hadn't achieved a hell of a lot on the book. He looked very promising, but it was easy enough to pick the form apart. Of course, he found the trip inadequate at Exeter, but he stepped up markedly to hit the frame at Cheltenham and the entry after that. And he's a horse who's just beginning to hit his straps now. So he looks a really promising type for fences. And yeah, I'd be disappointed if he's not good enough to win a race like this. You know, you don't really want to start your season off at Cheltenham in October by blotting your copybook. So I'd be hopefully he'd run really well. I've also always liked Does He Know as a project, and he did it nicely at Chepstow first time out. Again, he's got a bit of a flat pedigree, but he's very much a chaser in appearance. He ran at the same Exeter meeting and was very disappointing. I spoke to Kim Billy shortly after that, and he was kicking himself for running the horse because he thought it was a small field race. It was a Pretemps qualifier, and he thought he could give the horse options at the Cheltenham Festival by just give him an easy, and it'd be, he'd be guaranteed to be qualified. But the horse hated the heavy ground and didn't run a race at all. And then it was a terrible rush to get him to Cheltenham. He ended up running really well to be fifth in the Ballymore off what was a poor preparation, and he showed what he could do when winning at Chepstow first time out. Now he's got to give weight away here, which is not ideal to horses with plenty of class. But he is a nice sort going forward. The one blot in his copybook was that he ran out at Newbury in the Challow Hurdle. Again, I spoke to Kim about that, and I watched the race a number of times again. It's just he was looking around him all through the race, and I think he surprised himself when he saw the wing of the hurdle. The way the hurdles course is marked out at Newbury meant it was kind of an island, and it wasn't next to the rail. So he seemed to surprise himself, and he had to make a split-second decision, and he ducked left rather than ducking right. And I don't think that's really, it's not a sign of ungenuineness. He does have temperament. If you've watched him in the parade ring in any of his races, he tends to very nearly boil over, and he's a real handful pre-race. But I think as he gets older, he'll get better in that regard. So I think down the line, Does He Know is going to be a decent chaser, but he may struggle to give weight away here to the likes of Oscar Elite if that horse is fit.
Well, there we have it. The Jumps is back. Thank you very much to both Andy and to Rory for sharing their insight over the Friday and the Saturday of Cheltenham Showcase. That was our Cheltenham Showcase preview. Thanks once again to 888 Sport for sponsoring this podcast and video. And thank you very much again to Barry Geraghty for joining us for a chat. We're going to be with you throughout the National Hunt season, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast channel as well. You can find it on all podcast platforms there. You can find all of our previews every week over the National Hunt season. Please make sure that you do download the Oddschecker app, and please ensure you gamble responsibly. This is for 18 plus only. Ensure you enjoy the racing, but make sure you take all these tips and make sure you are gambling responsibly at all times. Thank you very much.